Hey, my name is Cassidy Harper. I'm 29 years old, and this is my story. You know that kind of story you only see in movies? Where the outcast daughter gets humiliated by her own family, publicly, brutally, and then somehow turns the tables in a way no one saw coming? That's exactly what happened to me. But it didn't start that way. It started with a birthday. My father's 60th, to be exact. A night that should have been about celebration turned into a cruel reminder of where I stood in the family, or at least where they thought I belonged. But they forgot one crucial thing. I never stay down for long. I grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a mid-sized town with cold winters, tighter communities, and the kind of family politics that don't make the headlines but cut deeper than any tabloid scandal. My father, Thomas Harper, was a local legend. One of those self-made men who built a successful chain of agricultural supply stores from the ground up. Everyone in town respected him. And for most of my life, I did too. But respect doesn't always go both ways. Growing up, I was the only daughter out of 3 kids. My brothers Dylan and Chase fit the mold of what my father wanted. Obedient, business-minded, and eager to follow in his footsteps. Me? I was different. I was creative, stubborn, and outspoken. I didn't want to inherit a feed store empire. I wanted to build something of my own. That decision made me the black sheep in the Harper family. They called me emotional, irrational, even ungrateful. But what they really meant was, you don't fit into our world. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you're rooting for people who rise from rejection to build something unstoppable. When I was 23, I moved out of the family home and cut financial ties. I started from scratch, bartending at night while studying digital marketing online. I worked my way through certifications, freelance gigs, anything that would push me forward. There were nights I went to bed with nothing but ramen in my stomach and doubt in my chest. But I kept going. I never told my family how hard it got. Why would I? They had already written me off. Over the years, my relationship with my dad became distant, to put it kindly. He'd still call on birthdays or holidays, usually with stiff politeness, as if talking to a distant relative instead of his daughter. But I never got invited to family strategy dinners, or included in vacations to Aspen or the Florida Keys. I watched from the sidelines as my brothers were groomed to take over the empire, as my name was gradually erased from anything that resembled legacy. So when I got an invitation to his 60th birthday party, sent via email, addressed to whom it may concern, I was stunned. Part of me thought it was a mistake. Another part thought maybe, just maybe, it was a gesture of reconciliation. Maybe he was finally ready to see me, not as the failure daughter, but as Cassidy, a woman who built something on her own. I almost didn't go. I stared at that email for hours, hovering over the delete button, but something in me said, no, show up. Look them in the eyes. I booked a hair appointment, picked out a modest but elegant navy blue dress, and drove myself to the Cedar Ridge Country Club on the night of the party. I didn't expect red carpets or warm hugs, but I didn't expect what happened next either. The moment I stepped through the marble entrance of the country club, it was like walking into a cold front. The lobby was filled with people in tailored suits and sparkling dresses, champagne flutes in hand, murmuring politely over soft jazz. I spotted my brothers near the bar, laughing with a group of executives. I raised a hand. Chase saw me, and in that moment, he turned his back, pretending not to. I swallowed hard and kept walking toward the main ballroom. A young hostess in a black cocktail dress intercepted me. Name? She asked without a smile. Cassidy Harper. I'm on the guest list. She tapped her iPad and frowned. I don't see you here. I took a deep breath. There must be a mistake. I was invited. Here. I pulled up the email on my phone. She leaned in, read it, then gave a tight smile. I'll need to check with management. She disappeared through a side door, leaving me standing alone under the judgmental eyes of a dozen strangers. After a few minutes, she returned, but not alone. She was followed by a security guard. A tall man with a buzz cut and the posture of someone who didn't ask questions, just followed orders. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, he said flatly. What? My voice cracked. This is a private event. You're not on the final list. Management reserves the right to deny entry. But I'm his daughter, I whispered, my cheeks burning. I'm Thomas Harper's daughter. The hostess crossed her arms. Look, we were told this party is for family and business associates only. Maybe you're confused. I felt every eye on me. People whispering, someone stifling a laugh. My stomach twisted into a knot of humiliation. I turned to leave, my heels clicking louder than they should have across the marble floor. I could feel the tears building, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. As I reached the parking lot, I leaned against my old Toyota and let out a slow breath. I wasn't crying. I was boiling, not because they humiliated me, but because they thought I was still the same girl who walked away 6 years ago with nothing. They didn't know. They didn't know that I had just signed a deal with a major national brand to run a full-scale marketing campaign across 4 states. They didn't know I had an office downtown with a growing team. They didn't know that Harper Media Group was listed in this quarter's Midwest Women in Business magazine under top 10 rising marketing firms to watch. They didn't know. I was still sitting there in disbelief when I heard a knock on my window. The same security guard. "I'm sorry, miss," he said, looking more uncomfortable now. "There's been a misunderstanding." I narrowed my eyes. "Our manager just got off the phone with someone named Randall Pierce. He said you're the founder of Harper Media? He's a VIP sponsor of tonight's event. He asked us to escort you back in and make sure you're treated accordingly." My jaw dropped. Randall Pierce was one of my biggest clients, and apparently a close associate of my father's. I hadn't realized he would be at the same event, and I certainly hadn't expected him to be the one to recognize me. "I was told to refer to you as Madam CEO, the guard added, a hint of something like respect in his voice now. I looked at him for a long moment, then stood tall. "No need," I said calmly, brushing off my dress. "But thank you for the clarification." As I walked back toward the building, heads turned. Whispers changed tone. This time, no one blocked the door. And when I stepped into the ballroom again, it was with a different presence. Because this time, I wasn't the poor, forgotten daughter. I was the woman they never saw coming. As I re-entered the ballroom, everything looked the same on the surface. Same lighting, same muted jazz, same groups clustered around cocktail tables. But the energy had shifted. Not for them, for me. I was no longer moving through the room like a ghost begging to be seen. Now, I was the storm they didn't see coming, and I was just getting started. I spotted Randall almost immediately. He stood near the head table, talking with a cluster of older men in navy suits. When he saw me, his eyes lit up, and he excused himself quickly, weaving through the crowd with a smile that looked both apologetic and amused. "Cassidy," he said, gripping my hand warmly. "I didn't know this was that Harper family. I wish you'd mentioned it." I shrugged, offering a wry smile. "Didn't seem relevant at the time." "Well," he said, motioning for a server to bring another drink. "Let me make it clear. It's relevant now. You being turned away like that? Unacceptable. I told Tom already. He looked like he swallowed a lemon. That made me laugh, short and bitter. I hadn't seen my father yet, but I could imagine the look on his face. Randall didn't linger long. He was, after all, still a sponsor and business contact. But the damage, or rather the correction, had been made. People now glanced at me differently. A few even approached, asking polite questions like, "So you're in marketing?" Or, "You work with Randall often?" I answered with grace but didn't go into details. Let them wonder. Let them guess. The irony? I hadn't come here to make a scene. I hadn't come here to prove a point. But they had pushed me into the spotlight, thinking they were pushing me out of their world, when in fact they had handed me the mic, and I was going to speak. Then I saw him, my father. He was standing near the front of the room, laughing a little too loud with a group of city council members. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his tux tailored within an inch of its life. He looked like the man Cedar Rapids adored. Successful, controlled, admired. He didn't see me at first. But my presence wasn't something he could ignore for long. When his eyes landed on me, the smile froze. It wasn't just surprise. It was something deeper, disbelief mixed with discomfort, like he was seeing a ghost he thought he buried years ago. And in a way, he had. He buried the version of me he could never control. Now, I was standing in front of him, alive, accomplished, and with the power to turn his narrative inside out. He approached slowly, as if unsure whether to scold or negotiate. "Cassidy," he said, voice low and cautious. "You're here." "Apparently so," I replied, lifting my champagne glass slightly. "Thanks for the warm welcome at the door." His jaw tightened. "There must have been some mistake." "There was," I said, leaning in just a bit. "You made it." He exhaled, not ready to argue in front of witnesses. Instead, he motioned toward the hallway that led to a private lounge reserved for close family and guests. I followed, curiosity outweighing my bitterness for now. Once we were inside, he turned sharply. "You could have warned me." "Warned you?" I blinked. "That I'd show up to the event I was invited to?" "You know what I mean," he said, his tone edging toward frustration. "All this, the business, Randall. Why didn't you ever say anything?" "I tried, remember?" I snapped. "Back when I needed a loan to start Harper Media. You said I didn't have the grit. Said I should work for Chase instead. Said I wasn't built for the real world." He looked away. "And when I left and started proving you wrong, you stopped asking. You didn't want to hear it. Because you cut yourself off from this family." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You cut me off. You wanted me to be part of your empire, your legacy, only if I played by your rules. But I made my own, and it turns out they work just fine." He sighed heavily and sat down on the leather couch, suddenly looking older. "I thought I was protecting you." I stared at him, stunned. "From what?" "From disappointment," he admitted. "From watching you crash and burn. I've seen people try and fail, Cassidy. I didn't want that for you." My heart twisted. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something like compassion, but it was smothered quickly by years of silence and condescension. "You didn't protect me," I said quietly. "You abandoned me and called it tough love. But I didn't crash, Dad. I flew." He didn't respond. We sat in silence for a moment, years of unspoken words hanging in the air like smoke. Finally, I stood. "I didn't come here for reconciliation. I came because I thought maybe I'd find some closure, but tonight gave me something better." He looked up. "It reminded me that I don't need a seat at your table. I built my own, and people are starting to notice." I walked out without another word, leaving him in that polished lounge with the echoes of what he lost. Back in the ballroom, I made my way through the crowd with new resolve. I wasn't finished. Not yet. I found Chase first. He was standing with two of his buddies from the corporate office, laughing about some intern disaster. When he saw me, he blinked, clearly trying to figure out how I got back in. "Cass," he said slowly, "I thought they turned you away." "They tried," I replied sweetly. "But then one of my business partners reminded them who I am." His friend chuckled nervously. "Wait, Harper Media? You're that Harper?" I smiled, watching Chase's face tighten. "That's right. You should talk to our brand director," the friend added. "We've been trying to rework our digital footprint, but the agency we're using is a mess." Chase interrupted quickly. "I doubt she's got the bandwidth for that kind of project." I looked him dead in the eyes. "Try me." The night continued like that. Little moments of poetic justice. A cousin who once mocked my silly online classes, now asking if I could help her husband's failing business. An aunt who used to say I was too emotional for the business world, now complimenting my dress and asking for my card. But the most satisfying moment came at the end of the night. The MC took the mic to thank everyone for attending, and before closing, he announced a list of people and companies who had helped sponsor the event. Randall's name came up first. Then, to my shock, he added mine. "And a special thanks to Harper Media Group for their last-minute support of tonight's festivities." There was a pause. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. People turned. Faces registered recognition. Some were confused. Others impressed. My father didn't move. He just stared at me from his table, his expression unreadable. I stood there, calm, confident, and exactly where I was meant to be. They thought they could erase me. Instead, they gave me the perfect stage. That night didn't end with applause or hugs, and it definitely didn't end with my father pulling me aside for a heartfelt apology. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing approval or pretending indifference. I had power, not just financial or professional, but something deeper, the kind that comes when you survive being underestimated for so long that it stops wounding you and starts shaping you. I drove home through the empty streets of Cedar Rapids, the cold night air seeping in through a crack in the window. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just let the silence sit with me, still tasting the tension of the evening. Somewhere between the streetlights and frozen sidewalks, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let that night be a one-off victory. I was going to burn the old version of me and everything they tried to force me into and build something bigger. The following Monday, I walked into my office early. It wasn't a towering skyscraper downtown or anything extravagant, but it was mine. A converted warehouse with high ceilings, exposed brick, and enough natural light to lift the spirits even in the dead of winter. My team, 5 full-timers and 3 rotating freelancers, were already trickling in with coffees in hand, chatting about campaigns and data reports. It felt alive. It felt real. And it was just the beginning. But as any woman who's ever built something from scratch can tell you, success doesn't quiet the ghosts. It invites them to knock louder. The knock came in the form of a phone call from my brother Chase 2 weeks later. I let it ring twice before answering. Cassidy. Chase. A pause. He always talked like he was negotiating something, even when it was just family small talk. I've been thinking, he started, about what happened at Dad's party, about everything. Sure you have. I mean it, he said, trying for sincerity. I think it's time we talked. I almost laughed. This was the same brother who hadn't texted me back in 2 years, who once told me over Thanksgiving dinner that Pinterest wasn't a real business model. Now he wanted to talk? I'm listening, I said, folding my arms as I stared out the window. Our marketing division's in trouble. Numbers are slipping, engagement is down, and the new VP they hired is clueless. I looked into your work. You're good. Really good. I think we could use your help. There it was. Not an apology, not even a compliment. Just the Harper way of saying, we need something from you. I see, I said slowly. And let me guess, this isn't about family, is it? He didn't answer that. I waited a beat. I'll think about it. Cassidy, come on. I said I'll think about it. And I did. Not because I wanted to save them, but because I saw the opportunity. That night, I pulled out every old Harper family file I could find, annual reports, press releases, board minutes my cousin had accidentally emailed me years ago. I studied them like a blueprint, and what I saw was exactly what I expected. A legacy brand resting on outdated strategies and an ego that refused to adapt. Their father's empire was crumbling under the weight of digital ignorance, and they were too proud to admit it. So, I made a plan. A week later, I walked into Harper & Sons headquarters for the first time in 7 years. It felt like stepping into a museum, sterile hallways, walnut paneling, walls lined with photos of my father shaking hands with local politicians. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed since 1998, and clearly hadn't wanted to. Chase met me in the lobby, wearing a forced smile and a tailored suit. I didn't think you'd actually come, he said. Neither did I replied. But here we are. He led me to the conference room where the other executives were waiting, men in their 50s and 60s, all trying to look more confident than curious. My father was there too. He gave me a polite nod, nothing more. I could feel the tension clinging to the air like humidity. Chase opened the meeting. Cassidy's agreed to consult on our digital strategy. We're keeping this internal for now. I interrupted, smiling. Actually, I haven't agreed to anything yet. The room shifted. I'll listen. But let's get one thing straight. I'm not your charity case. I'm not your little sister trying to prove herself. If I come on board, it's on my terms. And those are? My father asked, eyes narrowing. I want full creative control over the marketing division. I report directly to the board, not through Chase. I want a performance-based contract with a 10% profit incentive if I turn your numbers around in 12 months. And I want my agency logo, Harper Media, on every campaign rollout. A few of the board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. My father stared at me for a long time before leaning back in his chair. You really think you can do what our internal team couldn't? I met his gaze. I know I can. He didn't smile, but he nodded once. Then prove it. And just like that, the door opened. What followed was 6 months of pure fire. I gutted their old campaigns, rewrote every tired slogan, and brought in my team to overhaul the brand identity. We launched geo-targeted ad strategies, TikTok promos, YouTube video testimonials with local farmers, and rebranded the Harper legacy into something fresh. The board resisted me at first. So did Chase. But results speak louder than ego. By month 3, engagement was up 64%. Store traffic had increased by 32%. Even the media began picking it up. Small-town agribusiness reinvented by the founder's estranged daughter, read one headline. Every time I saw that phrase, founder's estranged daughter, I smiled. Let them label me. I'd make it impossible to forget. Still, power always comes at a cost, and mine came with whispers. One night after a board meeting, I overheard 2 executives talking in the hallway. She's good, but you know they're only letting her do this to keep the press happy. As soon as things settle, she's out. I didn't confront them. I didn't need to. I already had a plan. If they were going to use me as a temporary fix, I was going to use them as a permanent boost. That week, I began preparing a pitch to buy a majority stake in one of their subsidiary brands, an underperforming feed label they were planning to quietly shut down. I knew with the right rebranding and digital rollout, I could flip it into a direct-to-consumer success story. I lined up angel investors, used my Harper insider access to pull financials, and built a launch strategy that would make it impossible for the board to ignore. But I didn't pitch it to them. I pitched it publicly, at a regional business summit where I was scheduled to speak. The announcement hit like a grenade. Harper Media to acquire Harper Grow line in strategic revamp deal. The press exploded. The board panicked. My father called me 5 times that day. I let every call go to voicemail. Because this time, I wasn't just rewriting the family narrative. I was taking the pen. The moment my pitch hit the news, everything changed. I wasn't just the rebellious daughter or the unexpected marketing savior. I was a threat. A woman who had built her own kingdom and now had the audacity to return and carve out a piece of the old empire. The phone calls turned frantic. Emails flooded in from board members trying to clarify the misunderstanding or coordinate before any further public statements. But I didn't respond. I didn't owe them that. I had spent my 20s clawing my way out of the box they stuffed me in. I wasn't about to step back inside just to be polite. I wasn't naive. I knew they would retaliate. I just didn't realize how quickly. 2 days after the summit, I received a cease and desist letter from the Harper & Sons legal team claiming I was using proprietary brand assets and insider knowledge to gain an unfair advantage. I stared at the letter, heart pounding, not with fear, but fury. How dare they? How dare they try to weaponize the very thing they denied me for years? I called my lawyer, a sharp, meticulous woman named Renee who didn't flinch at intimidation tactics. She reviewed the letter, then looked up at me with a small, amused smile. "This is desperate," she said, "and weak. They don't have a case, but they're trying to rattle me," I replied. "Yes," she said, "because they're losing." We drafted a formal response. Calm, professional, absolute, along with a notice of intent to move forward with the acquisition of Harper Grow, backed by legal documentation of my due diligence, investor support, and a reminder that Harper & Sons had listed the brand for divestment 6 months prior. It was airtight, and they knew it. The media picked up on the drama almost immediately. Articles started surfacing about the internal collapse at Harper & Sons, speculations on leadership fractures, anonymous quotes from employees hinting at an outdated leadership model being shaken by innovation. My face appeared in industry magazines. Podcasts requested interviews. Young women in business started messaging me on LinkedIn, thanking me for being relentlessly visible and proving that power doesn't always wear a suit and tie. It was surreal. But it was also a reminder of why I couldn't slow down now. While the legal games played out in the background, I focused on building Harper Grow into something revolutionary. We stripped the label of its old aesthetic and gave it a bold new look. Modern typography, earthy tones, digital-first content. We partnered with eco-conscious farmers, created tutorials for sustainable gardening, launched an interactive app where users could track their crops and share community tips. It was everything Harper & Sons was too scared to do, and it was working. Still, it wasn't without cost. I was sleeping less. My team was working long hours, trying to keep up with the wave of demand that followed the publicity storm. There were moments, late at night in my office, staring at spreadsheets and campaign drafts, when I felt the weight creeping in, the pressure to prove myself, the fear that maybe I'd gone too far, that maybe I had become the villain in someone else's story. But then, I'd think about that night at the country club, about the way the security guard had looked at me like I didn't belong, about the way my brothers laughed as I was escorted out, and I'd remember, I wasn't doing this for revenge anymore. I was doing this because I deserved to exist without apology. I deserved to lead, to succeed. And if it disrupted their comfortable illusions, so be it. One Friday afternoon, I received an invitation to a business gala in Des Moines, an event hosted by the Iowa Chamber of Commerce to honor innovation in local industries. I assumed it was a mass invite, until I read further. Harper Media Group had been nominated for Most Promising Entrepreneurial Venture. My name was listed as a keynote speaker. I sat at my desk, stunned. Less than a year ago, I was still running ad mock-ups out of a shared co-working space and eating canned soup for lunch. Now I was being handed a microphone to tell my story in front of the very network that once overlooked me. I accepted the invitation. The night of the gala, I wore a crimson pantsuit, structured, bold, unforgettable. As I walked through the ballroom doors, there were stares. Some admiring, some calculating, but none dismissive. People saw me now, and more importantly, they listened. When it was my turn to speak, I stood behind the podium, scanned the crowd, and paused just long enough to command their attention. I was once told I wasn't built for the real world, I began, that I was too emotional, too unconventional, too risky. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the things they tell you make you weak are actually your greatest assets. Emotion gives us purpose. Unconventional thinking gives us innovation. And risk? Risk is where the magic happens. The room was silent. Then came the applause. Thunderous. Prolonged. Afterwards, a woman approached me near the bar. Maybe mid-40s. Professional but not rigid. "My daughter's starting a business," she said. "I told her about you. She thinks you're a rock star." That hit me harder than I expected. Not because of the compliment, but because I knew what that girl probably looked like when she stared at her laptop late at night, wondering if she was crazy to believe in herself. "Tell her she's not alone," I said. "And tell her to keep going." Not long after, I got a text from an unknown number. "Dad, you spoke well tonight." I stared at the message for a long time. My first instinct was to delete it, but I didn't. I saved it, not as validation, but as proof. Proof that even the walls we thought were unmovable could crack, that even the people who tried to silence you eventually had to listen. The following week, something happened I never saw coming. My youngest cousin, Ellie, reached out. She was just finishing her MBA and had been silently following my journey online. "I want to intern at Harper Media," she wrote, "not because of the name, because of the culture you're building." I invited her to the office. We talked for hours about brand vision, about boundaries, about what it meant to be a woman in business without being expected to play nice all the time. She reminded me of myself at 23, sharp, idealistic, a little scared, but hiding it behind big dreams. I offered her a paid internship on the spot. Later that evening, as I watched my team debrief the latest campaign metrics on a whiteboard, it struck me. This wasn't just about marketing, or revenge, or legacy. This was about rewriting what leadership looked like, about showing women, and anyone who's ever been underestimated, that you don't have to beg for a seat at the table. You can build your own, and if that makes people uncomfortable, good. Growth never happens in comfort. My journey had started in the shadows of someone else's empire, but it was no longer about them. It was about the empire I was building now. Brick by unapologetic brick. The shift wasn't just internal anymore. It was everywhere. Harper Media had grown beyond me, beyond Cedar Rapids, beyond what any of them ever imagined when they looked at me as the girl who couldn't fit into a boardroom. Our expansion campaign for Harper Grow had gone viral after a feature on an eco-sustainability blog turned into a larger profile in a national business magazine. Orders were flooding in, requests for partnerships, speaking engagements. I was suddenly managing success that outpaced even my boldest projections. But with growth came tension, and the cracks in Harper & Sons were widening by the day. I heard through one of my former contacts on the board, someone who had quietly supported me during the transition, that Chase had started lobbying internally to reabsorb HarperGrow before the acquisition was finalized. He was claiming it had been improperly transferred due to my past involvement in the company's operations. Desperation oozed from every corner of his argument, but desperation in the hands of the wrong people can still be dangerous. What he didn't know was that I had recorded nearly every meeting we had during those early transition months, not because I expected betrayal, though I probably should have, but because I knew that history has a way of being rewritten by those in power, and I'd already lived through that once. I called a private meeting with Renee, my lawyer, and Dylan, my head of operations. We sat in the quiet of my office long after the team had gone home, surrounded by papers, files, and the soft hum of the city outside the windows. "They're going to try to claim breach of contract," Renee said, tapping the cease and desist letter from months ago. "They want to make it messy." "Let them," I replied, fingers steepled. "We'll be ready." "They're going to underestimate you again," Dylan said, grinning. "They always do," I answered. But I wasn't smiling, because this time, I didn't want to just win. I wanted to end the cycle. The final board vote was scheduled for the following Thursday. Chase had somehow convinced my father to call for a closed session, attempting to vote on the retraction of HarperGrow's divestment, a technical loophole that, if passed, would delay the acquisition and potentially force renegotiations. He thought he was being clever, strategic, but he was playing checkers. And I'd been playing chess since the night they kicked me out of that party. When I arrived at the headquarters, I wore a charcoal suit with a deep green silk blouse underneath, a nod to the HarperGrow branding that had become synonymous with revival, growth, and innovation. I walked past the receptionist without being announced, past the hallway of framed awards with my father's proud smile, and into the conference room where the vote would take place. There were 6 board members present, including my father and Chase. I greeted them calmly, took my seat at the end of the long mahogany table, and opened my folder. Before anyone could begin, I placed a small voice recorder on the table and pressed record. "Just for accuracy," I said evenly. Given how complicated things have gotten lately, Chase shifted in his chair, visibly irritated. My father said nothing. They began the meeting with formalities, roll call, motion statements, procedural babble. Then Chase stood up and presented his case. He sounded polished, measured, like someone who had practiced his lines in the mirror all morning. "It's not about Cassidy," he said. "It's about ensuring the Harper name is protected. HarperGrow is an essential part of our agricultural legacy. It was never intended to be carved away like some expendable limb." He glanced around the room for support, eyes flicking between older allies. I waited, letting the moment expand. Then I stood. "May I?" Chase didn't answer, but no one stopped me. "I appreciate the concern for the Harper name," I began, walking slowly to the front of the room. "So, let me remind you of what that name has meant for the last decade. It meant silence when I asked for help. It meant rejection when I offered ideas. It meant humiliation in front of an entire community when I dared to show up." My voice didn't crack. It rang. "But I rebuilt. Without you. Without funding. Without support. I took HarperGrow, your discarded brand, and made it relevant. I did what this board refused to do for years. I listened. To the market, to the people, to innovation, and I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I could." A long silence filled the room, and then I placed a folder on the table, sliding it toward the chairman. "In this folder, you'll find a copy of the signed divestment agreement, dated 6 months ago. You'll also find investor statements, timelines, and voice transcripts of every conversation I had with Chase regarding the transition of HarperGrow." Chase's face turned pale. "This vote isn't about ethics. It's about ego. It's about someone who didn't think I'd succeed trying to rewrite history." My father finally spoke. "Cassidy," he said, voice lower than usual, "do you really want to escalate this in front of everyone?" "No," I said, looking him in the eye, "but I will, because I'm not scared of you anymore." The chairman opened the folder, read through the top documents, and motioned to the others. They whispered, "Pass the papers." studied the dates and signatures. After 10 minutes, they called the vote. It failed, 4-2. Chase looked gutted. My father looked tired. After the meeting, I walked out without a word. My work was done. I had defended what I built. But more than that, I had closed the door on the version of myself that needed their permission to succeed. A week later, the official press release confirmed Harper Media Group's full acquisition of Harper Grow. We celebrated in our office with champagne and music and takeout. My team danced, laughed, shared stories of what we'd overcome. Ellie, my cousin and now junior strategist, gave a toast. "To Cassidy," she said, lifting her glass, "who taught us how to take no and turn it into fuel." I didn't cry, but I felt every word in my chest. Later that night, I stayed behind to lock up. The office was quiet, peaceful. I walked through each room, touching the backs of chairs, the whiteboard filled with ideas, the framed articles on the wall. It felt like home, like I had finally found a space where I belonged, because I built it myself. As I reached the door, I checked my phone. Another message from my dad. "Dad, you proved your point, and I was wrong." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned it off. Some apologies come too late. Some bridges are better left burned. Days turned into weeks, and while the media storm around Harper Grow's acquisition began to settle, the ripples it created within the industry didn't fade. I started receiving inquiries from other legacy brands, some led by men who had previously dismissed me, now looking for someone who understood the intersection of modern storytelling and business. It was ironic, almost poetic, how quickly the gatekeepers became guests. And yet, with each new meeting I accepted and every door I chose to walk through, I did it on my own terms. I no longer needed to prove anything to them. I wasn't fighting for recognition anymore. I was protecting what I had built. Internally, my team was evolving. Harper Media was no longer a tight-knit startup struggling to pay software subscriptions. We had departments now, systems, structure. The office had expanded into the floor above us. A new studio was under construction for content creation. We were becoming something bigger than me, and that was the most satisfying part. Watching other voices rise, other women lead, and knowing I had helped create the space for it. Not by asking, not by waiting for approval, but by claiming it. Still, despite the momentum and growth, the dust hadn't fully settled. I could feel it in the silence between meetings, in the glances from old board members when we crossed paths at events, in the way my father's texts kept coming, short, spaced out, hesitant. "Dad, congrats on the Forbes article. Impressive work. Dad, spoke with someone from the chamber. They're praising Harper Grow. You've come a long way. Dad, wondering if we could sit down sometime. Just talk." I never responded. Not because I hated him. I didn't. But some conversations require something more than words. They require history to be rewritten, not with apologies, but with changed behavior. And I hadn't seen that yet. The version of him I remembered was a man who could stand tall in a room of CEOs, but cowered at the thought of his daughter being equal to him. Until that changed, there was nothing to talk about. One rainy Thursday afternoon, a delivery arrived at the office. A large envelope addressed by hand, no return address. I opened it carefully, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a photo, an old one. Me at age 15, standing next to my dad in front of the original Harper & Sons store. I was holding a clipboard, looking serious. He had his hand on my shoulder. It must have been taken the summer I asked to intern, back when I thought the company could be my future, before I understood how tightly they guarded their thrones. Beneath the photo was a letter, folded neatly, the handwriting unmistakably his. "Cassidy, I don't expect this to change anything. But I found this picture and realized I'd been seeing it all wrong for years. I thought I was teaching you how to lead. But you were leading already, and I didn't see it. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe I was too afraid you'd outgrow everything I built. But you did, and I'm proud of that. You didn't need me to become who you are. And maybe that's the part that stings the most. But it's also the part that gives me hope." Dad, I read it once, then twice, and I sat with it for a long time. It wasn't the apology I once craved, but it was something honest, quiet, raw. I didn't respond to that either. But I didn't throw it away. Instead, I pinned the photo to the corkboard behind my desk, not as a tribute to him, but as a reminder of the girl who once stood there, dreaming of her future, not yet knowing that it wouldn't be handed to her. She would have to go out and take it. The summer that followed was a turning point, not just for the company, but for me personally. I started spending more time alone, not in isolation, but in restoration. Walks along the river before sunrise, journaling without purpose, late nights reading instead of strategizing. I had built everything I set out to build. Now it was time to ask myself what kind of life I wanted to live within it. That's when the idea came. It wasn't a flashy revelation or some burst of sudden clarity. It was quiet, gentle. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment one night, candles flickering, looking through old notes from when I first launched Harper Media. I found an entry I had written in the margins of a printout. Create something for people like me, people they underestimate. I hadn't done that yet, not fully, so I did. I launched a new program within Harper Media, a mentorship initiative designed for young entrepreneurs who had no connections, no legacy, and no roadmaps. People with big ideas and small resources. We partnered with community colleges, women's shelters, immigrant organizations. We offered courses, coaching, startup kits, and funding. I called it The Forge, because we weren't just shaping businesses, we were building people from fire. Within 3 months, we had our first cohort, 22 applicants, 18 accepted. One girl named Tasha reminded me so much of myself it hurt. Soft-spoken, fiercely smart, and unsure whether she belonged in rooms where she was the only one who didn't have a last name that opened doors. She asked me once, "What do you do when people don't take you seriously?" I looked at her and said, "You don't ask them to. You show them why they should have." As word of the program spread, press picked it up again. But this time, the narrative wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was about creation, growth, and the woman who had taken every no and turned it into a resource. Harper Media became a hub, not just for marketing, but for movement, for momentum, for people who had been told they were too loud, too different, too much. We were no longer just rewriting one story. We were creating dozens. And still, through it all, I never went back to the Harper estate. Never walked through those doors again. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. One day, as I was walking out of the office with Ellie, she looked at me and said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if they hadn't pushed you out?" I paused for a moment. "All the time," I said. "But then I remember, if they hadn't shut that door, I never would have built my own." She nodded, understanding. The past didn't disappear. It still lingered in old photos, in text messages left unanswered, in birthday cards I never opened. But it didn't hold power over me anymore. I had turned pain into purpose, rejection into legacy, and in doing so, I found something no boardroom could ever give me: peace. 2 years passed. The city changed in ways I hadn't noticed when I was too busy chasing, building, proving. New businesses opened, some old ones closed. The skyline felt taller, even if it really wasn't. It just looked different from the view I now carried. Harper Media was no longer a name whispered with curiosity. It had become a landmark, a symbol of what happened when someone refused to stay in the box they were given. But the biggest changes weren't external. They were within me. I learned how to slow down, how to trust people, how to delegate without fearing everything would collapse without my hands on it. I started taking Friday afternoons off. Sometimes I'd go to a quiet bookstore on the east side, buy a stack of novels I knew I wouldn't finish, and sit by the window just to people watch. Other times I'd drive through the countryside, no destination in mind, just letting the silence settle inside me like soft earth. I was no longer a woman trying to outrun her past. I had outrun it. And now, I was simply living. The Forge program had tripled in size. We were launching cohorts in 3 new cities: Minneapolis, St. Louis, and Kansas City. Our alumni were thriving. One had launched an online wellness brand that went viral. Another had secured her first investment round for a tech app built entirely from a public library computer. Every time one of them succeeded, I felt a quiet swell of pride, like planting a seed and watching it bloom far beyond where you placed it. One evening, during a celebration event for the 3rd cohort, I stood in the back of the room as my team presented the new logo for the expanded initiative. It had evolved into a foundation now, a self-sustaining arm of Harper Media focused solely on mentorship and business incubation. Ellie had taken over leadership. She stood confidently at the front, speaking to a packed audience, her hands moving with ease, her voice clear. Watching her speak felt like watching the future arrive early. After the event, she pulled me aside. "You know," she said, "you could take a break, go somewhere warm, sleep in, let us run things for a while." "I know I could," I said, smiling, "but I'm not sure I'd know how." "Well, figure it out. You earned it." That night, I sat alone on my apartment balcony, a glass of wine in hand, and stared at the stars. I thought about everything that had brought me here: the night of my father's birthday, the moment at the country club door, the conference room showdown, the silence that came after the noise. I thought about how many times I had asked myself if it was worth it. The fights, the late nights, the heartbreak of being dismissed over and over. It was, but not because I'd won, because I had changed. There was a time I would have given anything just to hear my father say he was proud of me, but now I no longer needed it. That need had dissolved somewhere between the first time I signed payroll checks with my name on them and the moment a young woman whispered, "Because of you, I didn't quit." That was legacy. A few months later, something happened that, in another life, might have shattered me. My father passed away. Heart attack. Quiet. Sudden. I got the call from Chase late one evening. His voice was hollow, formal. "I thought you should know." "Thank you," I said. "There's going to be a service," he added. "Private. Family only. I know things have been complicated, but I thought you might want to be there." I didn't answer right away. I remembered the feeling of being turned away at the door. I remembered the coldness, the silence, the years of not being seen, but I also remembered the letter, the photo, the cracks in his armor near the end, and part of me wondered if showing up would be for him or for me. "I'll think about it," I finally said. I didn't go. Instead, I wrote a letter, not to be read aloud, not for anyone else to see, just for myself. "Dad, you were wrong about me, but I was wrong about you too. I thought you didn't care, but I think you did. I think you were just scared. Scared I wouldn't make it. Scared I would. Scared that love couldn't survive disappointment. But here's the thing. I loved you anyway, even when you failed me, even when I stopped looking for your approval. And I forgive you. Not because you asked me to, but because I'm ready to stop carrying it. Cassidy." I folded the letter and placed it inside an old book of his I still kept on my shelf, a copy of The Hard Thing About Hard Things he once gave me when I was 16, and told him I wanted to run my own company. It was the one time he didn't laugh. Time passed and the company kept growing. We opened a second office in Chicago. I hired a new creative director. I stepped back from daily operations and focused on long-term vision and storytelling, my first love. I started writing. Not just emails and business plans, but essays, reflections. Eventually, a publisher approached me. They wanted a book, not a how-to guide, a story. So I wrote it. It wasn't just my story. It was the story of every person who's been told they weren't enough, who got shut out of rooms they were qualified to be in, who were told to be quieter, easier, smaller. I titled it "The Room They Closed Wasn't Mine." It hit shelves the following spring. And in the very first chapter I wrote, "They kicked me out of my father's birthday party because they thought I didn't belong, but I wasn't the one who was lost. They were. I wasn't poor. I was rich in all the ways that matter. Vision, resilience, fire. They just couldn't see it yet. Years from now, if someone asks me what I'm most proud of, I won't say Harper Media, or The Forge, or the speaking tours, the features, the press. I'll say this. I never let who they were keep me from becoming who I am, and I gave others the courage to do the same. That, to me, is victory. That, to me, is enough." Have you ever been pushed out by your own family, only to realize later it was the greatest gift they could have given you? Share your story in the comments below. Your strength might inspire someone else. If this journey touched your heart, please like and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of resilience and transformation. And if you know someone who's been underestimated, share this with them. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't loud, It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Thank you for watching, and remember, you don't need their seat at the table if you can build your own.